Can you believe that a poor village girl could change the destiny of an entire community with nothing more than a notebook? Amahle Ndlovu was handed over by her parents to a fisherman as payment for debt. But instead of abuse, he gave her his coat, shared his best fish, and secretly taught her how to read. The shocking truth: that fisherman was once Chike Adesina, a billionaire who vanished in a shipwreck 10 years earlier. I've studied hundreds of survival stories, but none as powerful as this. A man who buried his empire beneath the sea only to rebuild hope on the banks of a forgotten river. In the next 60 seconds, you'll discover how an orphan girl inspired an entire village, why a man chose love over wealth, and how a broken hut door became the gateway to a new school. Amahle once lived as a debt to be repaid, but she rose as the first student, then the teacher of her people. And when the school was built, the villagers turned the old hut's door into its entrance, proof that pain can become a new beginning. If you skip this story, you may never realize how love can defeat poverty and prejudice. Watch closely, because human dignity is worth more than all the riches in the world. The river kept its own clock, not hours on metal hands, but the slow beat of water slapping wood, the breath of mangroves, the hush after a name is sold, under the yellow eye of a smoky lamp, at Amahle Bend where the current curled like a tightened rope. A table of rough planks waited, ink bottle, a reed pen, a page that already smelled like ash because it was about to become permanent. The village head, Jumatamba, warmed the lamp's glass with his palm, steadying the flame against the wind. Its light drew a circle in the dark, and inside that circle stood Amahle, her wrists free, but her body bound by everything that wasn't rope. Her mother had powdered her face like for a festival. It made her skin look drier than it was, like clay in drought. Her father Bakari did not meet her eyes. His shoulders were sleek with river damp, his jaw stubborn as a paddle blade. When the headman pushed the reed pen over, Bakari signed one long scratch of a name that cut through the quiet. The paper drank it all, the name, the breath behind it, the last bit of tenderness he hadn't already spent. The lamp hummed. A moth burned itself into smoke. Someone in the gathered crowd coughed to say it was time. On the other side of the plank table, the man who had come with the river watched without moving. Kofi Mensah carried the heaviness of water on him, salt on his cuffs, a crease of rope pressed into his palms, the smell of smoke and boat tar stitched into his threadbare coat. He wasn't older than 35, perhaps, but the river had a habit of carving years into people's faces like channels. He looked at the paper the way fishermen look at the sky, scanning for weather. When the headman leaned to fix the red seal, Kofi glanced at Amahle's bare shoulders. In the same breath that the seal struck down and left its wet circle, he shrugged off his own coat and placed it over her, gentle as a blanket on a sleeping child. No one expected gentleness, not with a document on the table and a crowd at their backs, not with hunger watching through the eyes of men who had come to verify the terms. The coat was heavy and smelled of wood smoke and dried salt. It held the night where it touched her, and she wanted to lean into that warmth with the animal instinct of someone who has been cold too long. She did not. She stood with her hands at her sides, nails clenched into flesh, until half moons appeared. Jumatamba lifted the page, checked the stamp, checked the names again. The wax-red circle glowed like a small wound. "It is done," he said, voice quiet, soft enough that if the river wanted, it could swallow his words whole. Amahle felt more than heard the sound of bodies shifting behind her. No cheers, no blessing, only the rustle of someone biting into roasted maize, the high laughter of boys on the edge of the crowd daring one another to spit farther, the wet smack of a fishtail as it fell from a basket. She had been passed like any other thing traded on the riverbank: calabash gourds, palm oil, gossip, a borrowed knife. The coat's collar scratched her neck. She stood straighter, as if posture could add a wall between her and the gaze that weighed her value. Kofi reached into the boat and pulled up a woven string of fish, thin bodies dark as flint, already dried to paper. He placed the string by Bakari's hand, not part of the paper, not in the headman's ledger. The movement was small and plain as rain. He did not look for gratitude. He did not ask for a nod. Bakari's mouth tightened. Some mixture of relief and shame moved across his face fast as a ripple, vanished. The mother gathered the fish with a quick hand and tucked them into her cloth wrap, a gesture so practiced it might have been muscle memory. "Boat," Kofi said then, the first word he had given the night. He did not touch Amahle's arm. He gestured with an open palm toward the skiff tied to a stump, a narrow thing with a little hut of woven reeds near the stern. The hut's doorway was no taller than a child, its thatch patched in places with oilcloth, a boat's version of a roof patched one too many times. The smell coming from it was of old smoke, rosemary, and fish bones charred down to sweetness. The moon was a bone button caught in a scarf of cloud. She felt the eyes at her back press. Some women click tongues the way women do when they see something they know will cost a girl her softness. A man laughed softly, the kind that hides teeth because it doesn't want to be blamed for anything. One of the older men drew close enough for her to hear a whisper past his palm. "First night, eh? Law of river." It was not a law. It was a myth dressed as a rule, repeated until even the shyest girls believed it. The whisper sank into her like cold. She wasn't sure, even now, when her blood had learned to pulse in her throat. She wasn't sure when the night had grown a second face and looked at her with it. She stepped toward the skiff because her feet found the way. The coat hung to her thighs. The hem was frayed into little threads that tickled her skin. She tasted metal, fear tasting like coins. Maybe she had bitten her tongue. Maybe the river had put its taste in her mouth. The lamp's glow leaned and straightened with a breeze. Juma Tamba watched, his eyes not unkind but careful. He had stamped the circle that would outlive every breath in this night. He would be remembered by that circle, too, on the planks. Kofi moved as a man who had slept on water since the first tooth fell from his mouth. He kept the skiff steady with his thigh and offered a palm not to claim, but to steady. Amahle took it. His hand was warm, calloused, but dry. She had expected wet. His skin was a map of little ridges and scars, every one a line where something hard had touched him and left a memory. When she climbed into the boat, he let go and turned to unloop the rope. The fiber creaked. A frog croaked like a laugh from under the pier. Somewhere a child asked, "Why no drums?" A woman hushed him and put sugar into his mouth. Inside the reed hut, a mat lay rolled in the corner. A folded blue cloth lay on top, washed 100 times to a gray that still remembered blue. A clay pot, blackened at the belly. A tin cup, a small bundle tied with string. The hut smelled like all the dinners it had ever seen, and also like a bag of dried hibiscus flowers opened quick. The air was warmer in there. The river, muffled. She did not sit. Behind her, the night breathed. Kofi's presence lingered at the doorway. She felt it against her back like the warmth of a cooking fire someone has just left. She waited for his shadow to move forward into the hut. weighted in a way that made her ribs feel like they were trying to climb out of her chest. The men on shore shifted for a better view with the practiced indifference of people watching weather. If lightning struck, they would say they always knew it would. Kofi did not step inside, a rustle of cloth. He set something down on the deck, a mat unrolled, coarse weave whispering a promise of splinters. He placed a coil of rope as a pillow. She turned her head and saw him through the doorway, lying long along the boards outside the hut, coatless, eyes toward the sky, hands crossed loosely over his chest like a man who trusts sleep. The plank under his shoulder was scarred from an old fire. The river licked the hull with soft tongues. He blinked, slow, a man measuring the moonlight with his lashes. He did not look at her. The murmurs from shore grew confused, then went thin. She felt a heat that wasn't shame move through her, a heat like the first swallow of soup when you have been starving. Painful, because it is kind. All the stories that had lived on the rafters of her head about men and papers, nets and debts, went quiet for a moment, like birds in a sudden wind. He had set the terms with his own body. You inside, I out here. The coat around her shoulders grew warmer. She had the wild urge to shrug it off and put it over him, the way children think they can pay back everything by a single good act. She did not. She drew the coat tight at the throat and sat on the rolled mat inside the hut. Her knees knocked once because the boat shifted. The reed walls whispered. The world came back, the hiss of a lantern being trimmed, the stutter of sand under someone's heel, the sound of a baby trying to hush its own cry with its fist. "Push," Kofi said softly to himself more than anyone, and put the pole to the mud. The skiff jolted, then slid into the dark. They left the lamp circle and entered the long blue-black corridor of river. Stars shook themselves loose from the leaves and dropped small lights onto the water. Frogs, crickets, a night heron's complaint. The sound of the crowd did not fall away at once. You carry those sounds farther than you think. She would hear them days later, washing spoons, and not know why her stomach clenched. Now they trailed behind like a thin scarf, growing lighter with each push. In the hut she touched the clay pot and found it cool. Her fingers came back with soot like old memories. She pressed them together until the black smeared into her lifelines. She could smell the river through the reed door, vegetation and mud, and the clean bite of spray when the bow cut just right. Somewhere in the distance a drum spoke once, then remembered there was no festival, only transactions, and went quiet. On shore, her mother moved, maybe, in that way that meant she wanted to call out and could not afford the cost of it. Bakari stood like a stump. Juma Tamba held the lamp steady. Kofi's breath on the deck outside was the slow kind that does not pretend. It told its own story. Man settles. Man waits out the judgment of strangers with his face open to the sky. No perfume of palm wine on his exhale. No fussy cigar. Only the clean, tired scent of work that does not apologize for itself. She looked at his silhouette, the soft outline of jaw and cheek, a throat that rose and fell. The rope under his head lifted the skin of his temple just enough to make him look boyish. A boy who had fallen asleep on the floor when he meant to make a fort of blankets and did not finish. A small wave slapped. The skiff shivered. She put her palm to the reed wall to steady herself and thought, I am freight. It was not pity. It was a measurement, like the weight of cassava or wood or grief. She counted her breaths to make herself into a ledger she could read. 30 breaths, 31. 32. The coat warmed. Her body returned to her in increments. First the feet, then calves, then the long, tight muscles of thighs that had kept her upright too long. On the shore, the circle of light had shrunk to a coin. She saw the headman's lamp more than she saw faces now. She saw the red-mouthed stamp on the paper in her mind again, that round mark that pretended to be only wax. She imagined it drying. She imagined it holding. She imagined it being held up again on some future day when someone would need proof that rivers can carry not only fish, but possibility. That thought surprised her. It was too large and too bright for a mind that had lived this hour. A boy on shore called, "Will you bring back stories?" and was shushed. Another voice said, "He will take what he paid for." The second voice carried farther than the first. The river held that too. It always did. Words in water travel in strange ways. Sometimes they come back on you from downstream, when you aren't looking. Kofi turned his head then, just a fraction, as if he'd heard something answer him from the mangroves. The movement caught the last of the lamplight and placed a soft line along his cheekbone. "Sleep," he said, without looking into the hut. A single word, carried as if it did not know it could bruise. She did not know if she could. The mat under her was firm as baked earth. The coat was heavy enough to make her feel held. In her mouth the taste of metal faded and gave way to the taste of old smoke, to the ghost of rosemary, to the bitter that always lives in night air near water. She closed her eyes and saw the undersides of leaves, green even in darkness, the little insect tracks cut into them like tiny letters no one reads. She opened her eyes again, because seeing the world was the only thing that made it not swallow her. The push-pole eased out of mud and into water with a soft release. The boat slid. The crowd, that installed audience behind every decision, grew small. Someone began a song and stopped after 2 notes because the words refused to be found. Juma Tamba lifted the lamp higher and the flame jumped. He did not speak blessing, because some words, when said to paper, become law, when said to people, become unwanted promises. He held the light and watched the shadows choose where to fall. The glass trembled in his hand, making the light ripple. In that ripple, the stamped red circle on the paper threw back a dull shine. He glanced at Bakari, who stared past him at nothing. He looked at the mother, who had retreated into the posture of women who have no pockets for sorrow that isn't practical. Out on the water, the boat's reeds whispered. The river breathed and took them into its lung. Only then did it happen. A pull in her chest so tight she thought something had broken. Not because of fear, not because of the boat's wobble, because of the look she caught when she turned back. A last look is a blade and a balm both. Her mother had her back already turned, the way a person leaves a stove they know will burn them if they face it. Bakari shifted his feet and found the earth where a man who has made a bargain must stand. Neither looked at her. The lamp, though. The lamp looked. It wavered. It tilted and corrected. Its flame leaned toward her and made a thin line of light across the black water, a drawn eyelid, a witness that would not close. Her breath stuttered. She could feel Kofi's warmth through the reed even though he lay on the other side, outside, under the open dark. She could feel the future pressing against her in 100 small ways, the way the reed hut framed her vision, like a page about to be written, the way the coat held her shoulders as if they were not meant to carry alone, the way the red circle on that paper would not stay on the table, but had already entered the stream of what would matter. She curled on the mat and let the boat rock the rhythm mothers use when their arms are strong. Her eyelids lowered and lifted quick. as if they remembered light and were reluctant to surrender. She swallowed. The taste of smoke softened into something like bread, left on the fire a little too long but still sweet. A frog leaped. A fish turned its silver belly to the moon, and then away again. The boat kept moving. Behind them, on shore, the lamp's glow collapsed into a trembling dot. The headman's hand steadied it again, as if he could fix more than flame. It shivered once more, an unblinking eye on the water, and then, just as the skiff slipped fully into the black, blinked in a gust and burned on, a distant star nobody could reach but everyone could feel. The night pressed heavy with the smell of salt and smoke. A crooked hut stood close to the water, its roof patched with palm thatch, its door hung by a rusted lock that rattled when the wind passed. The air inside carried the weight of old fires, of fish scales burned into ash, of a life stripped to the bone. Amahle stepped across the threshold, the borrowed coat still on her shoulders, and felt the strange stillness of a place that had forgotten how to welcome anyone. The lamp glow caught the edge of the locked wooden door, the one that did not belong in such a simple hut. It leaned in its frame like a secret daring her to listen. Kofi's voice came from behind, low and plain. "Don't open." Then silence, only the shiver of the lock when the wind sighed again. She sat by the clay hearth, the smell of salt still sharp on her skin. Her stomach ached from hunger, not loud but steady, like a fist pressing. Kofi moved with a quiet rhythm, pulling down a clay pot, setting dried fish to simmer, smoke rising and curling into the thatch. The crackle of fire softened the air, and when he set the food out, he slid the best pieces toward her, the ones with soft flesh, leaving himself the brittle scraps clinging to bones. He ate them without complaint, chewing slow, his eyes lowered. Amahle hesitated before lifting her portion. The taste was clean, smoky, sharper than anything she had known from home. Each bite filled her with warmth and unease. Because kindness was harder to swallow than hunger, he said little. Only once, when her eyes wandered back to the locked door, he repeated, "Not that one." The words fell heavy, but not angry, more like a boundary drawn in sand before the tide. She nodded, though her curiosity curled around the shape of the door. The lock glistened faintly in the firelight, an old iron mouth closed tight. She wondered what could be hidden in a hut so bare. When the meal was done, he cleared the scraps and sat close to the embers. Amahle watched him, studying the way his fingers traced the rim of the tin cup. The hands were rough, scarred by rope and wood, but the way they lingered on the edge of metal was not clumsy. She thought of the men in the village who boasted of their work, their laughter thick with palm wine. Kofi was different, stripped of all display. His silence was not emptiness, but something held back, like a tide waiting on the moon. She lowered her gaze to the dirt floor, thinking he might be the kind of man who never learned letters. His hut carried no books, no carved boards with names, only the smell of river and ash. She almost pitied him then, and with pity came a flicker of superiority, shameful and fleeting. Beside the fire, she noticed a bundle tied with string, cloth worn to the color of old earth. When Kofi saw her glance, he untied it slowly and revealed a book bound in faded fabric. The edges were frayed, the cover stained, but it was handled with a care that betrayed reverence. He pushed it toward her. "Tomorrow," he said, as if promising something, not forbidding. His tone was steady, but there was weight in it, a kind of guarded hope that made her chest tighten. She touched the cloth cover with hesitant fingers, felt the ridges of thread, the heat still clinging from his hands. Then she pulled back, unsure if she was meant to read or simply keep it near. Later, when the moon rose pale and sharp above the river, she stepped outside to breathe air not filled with smoke. The night smelled of salt, mud, and crushed herbs from the bank. Her feet sank in damp sand, cool grains sliding between her toes. She thought of her parents, how their faces had already turned away from her at the bend. She thought of the red seal on the paper that made her less daughter, more debt. She wanted to carve her own name somewhere the water could not erase, but she had no ink, no surface, only sand. Kofi followed quietly, his shadow folding over hers. She stiffened, expecting words, perhaps demands. Instead, he bent, took the wooden handle of a spoon, and began to draw on the sand at their fight. At first, she thought it was a mark, some rough outline. But then the lines curved, looped, flourished. Letters emerged, clear, deliberate, beautiful. They linked like a ribbon laid on water, smooth and practiced. The moonlight traced the strokes, and the sand shone pale around them. Amahle's breath caught. The man who lived like a fisherman wrote with the grace of scholars, with precision that spoke of schooling beyond her reach. Each letter shimmered like a door she did not know existed. She stared, her hunger forgotten, her skin prickling. Her first thought was disbelief. He should not have known how to form letters like that. Not a man of nets and salt. Yet the evidence lay clear before her toes. She whispered, half to herself, "You can." But her voice broke before the rest. He did not answer. He wrote a second line, even finer, the characters curling like vines on a carved pillar. Then he dropped the spoon, brushed his hand over the words. The grains scattered, swallowing everything. The sand lay smooth again, as if nothing had ever been. Amahle's heart lurched. She knelt quick and reached out, but her fingers found only cold grit. Her mind raced, fighting between awe and fear. Who was he really? Why hide skill behind silence? Why build walls of secrecy in a hut of reeds? The locked door pulsed in her thoughts. If he could write like that, what else had he hidden there? She looked at him with new eyes, not as the fisherman who slept outside to spare her, but as someone she could not measure. His face gave no answer. The river wind tugged his hair, shadows painting his cheek with doubt and grief. Amahle pressed her palm to the sand and smeared the last faint traces of letters. Her hand shook. In that act, she felt as though she was erasing the image of the man she thought she knew. A fisherman, simple, a debtor's buyer, gone. What remained was a figure she could not name, cloaked in secrets. Fear coiled low in her stomach, not the fear of violence, but of the unknown, of stepping into water too deep to stand. The waves whispered against the bank, the reeds swayed, and the lock on the door rattled once more, as if agreeing that some truths were better hidden. She rose, the coat heavy on her shoulders. Her heart pounded in rhythm with the river. Kofi stayed still, looking out at the dark sweep of water, not at her. His silence felt heavier now, not a kindness, but a mystery pressing against her ribs. She wanted to ask, but the words died in her throat. She turned back toward the hut, clutching the cloth-bound book like it might burn her if she dropped it. Inside, the fire had sunk to embers. The locked door gleamed faintly in the glow, red iron eye unblinking. Amahle lay down on the mat, but sleep would not come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the lines in the sand, letters flowing and dissolving under her hand. She felt again the tremor of her own palm as she erased them, as if she had chosen ignorance when knowledge frightened her. She pulled the coat tighter and bit her lip until she tasted blood. The night hummed with frogs and the lap of water against wood. Her eyes burned with questions she could not speak. Beyond the reed wall, she could hear Kofi's breath, steady and near, but carrying the distance of another world, and she understood, with a chill that shook her, that she had no idea who the man beside her really was. The first crack came in the roof, a single sharp snap like a bone breaking high in the rafters. Rain followed before the sky even lit up, as if the heavens were pouring without warning. Amahle jerked awake to the sound of wind shoving the reed walls. The thatch above her hissed and fluttered like frightened birds. In the half-dark, she could see the fire had long died. Kofi wasn't beside the hearth. She stood slowly, feeling for the edges of the hut as the wind howled again, louder now, pulling at the roof like angry fingers. The lock on the wooden door clattered against its plate. Another gust slammed the walls, and then the door gave in, not a full swing, but a sudden violent rattle, the wood tearing just enough for the edge to break loose. The rusted lock snapped from its hinge and hit the ground with a dull thud, barely heard under the thunder. The door swung inward with a groan, opening not like a secret revealed, but like a wound reopening. Amahle froze. Inside was a room unlike the rest of the hut, clean, dry, touched by care. It smelled not of smoke or fish, but of lavender and old paper. The air was still. No dust danced. The rain hadn't reached here yet. For a moment it felt like stepping into someone's memory. On a narrow table sat a photograph in a carved frame. 3 figures, a man in a navy suit, a woman with soft eyes, a child in her lap. Their clothes shimmered with old wealth, their postures proud. Amahle stepped closer, drawn by the stillness. The man in the photo was younger but unmistakable. That jawline, the slope of shoulders. She turned toward the outer room, breath caught. It was Kofi, or who she thought was Kofi. Beside the photo was a stack of books, their spines straight, leather-bound, one in French, another in Latin. A thin gold watch rested atop them, its surface catching what little light leaked through the reed wall. She picked it up slowly. On the back, words were etched in delicate script. To CA, always find your way back. N. Her mouth went dry. Sia. She blinked, heart pounding against the inside of her ribs like a prisoner rattling the bars. A faint shuffle behind her made her spin. Kofi stood in the doorway of the hut, soaked through, hair clinging to his forehead, shirt plastered to his skin. He didn't speak. Water dripped from his chin. In the dim, he looked like someone returned from drowning. You're not... Her voice wavered. He didn't answer, just stepped inside slowly, as if each movement cost him something. He looked past her, toward the photo, toward the watch in her hand, toward the past that had come alive without permission. A long silence stretched. Amahle set the watch down carefully, as though it might vanish if dropped. "Who are you?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Still nothing. But his eyes, they were speaking 100 things. Pain, regret, grief that had never learned how to rot quietly. Then he stepped past her, into the room, and reached for a small wooden box at the edge of the shelf. It opened with a soft creak. Inside lay a single ring, simple but etched with a crest she didn't recognize. He turned it over in his hand, fingers trembling. The rain slammed harder against the walls, but the inside of that room felt untouched, like a tomb waiting to be disturbed. "Chike Adesina," she said, barely able to force the name from her mouth. It felt foreign, like glass on the tongue. "You're him." This time he looked at her, and nodded, not with pride, not with explanation, but with the quiet acceptance of someone who has been found by something he hoped would never reach him again. The wind shoved against the open wall of the hut, scattering embers. Outside, the river churned brown with mud and storm, rising against the banks, furious and restless. But in the hush of that hidden room, everything felt carved from stillness. They stood in it together. The moment broke with a voice from outside. "Hallo, the hut. Bad time for the river. Any room to wait out this madness?" A man stumbled in, soaked and shivering, lugging a cloth-wrapped satchel over his back. "Bless the gods for signs of fire," he muttered. "I was about to swim back to Amahle." Kofi stepped quickly out of the secret room, gently closing the door with his body in front of it. "There's space by the wall," he said, voice steady again. "Rain won't reach there." The man grinned. "You've got shelter and silence. I'll take it." Amahle stared, trying to pull her own face back into calm. The man, older, his hands stained with the dust of trade, his boots split at the sole, set down his bag and stretched, casting quick glances around the hut. His eyes paused at the locked door now hanging off its hinge. "Storm do that?" Kofi gave a short nod. "I'll mend it tomorrow." "Good luck with that," the man chuckled. "Locks always break when they're hiding something." He peeled off his wet tunic, hung it near the embers, then noticed the watch still gleaming on the floor where Amahle had placed it. He crouched, squinting. "That's fine work, real fine. Haven't seen engraving like that since—" His voice caught. His gaze flicked to Kofi, then back to the initials. Amahle saw the change. Not loud but unmistakable. The narrowing of eyes. The way the man's hand slid to the inner fold of his jacket, pulling out a battered phone with a half-cracked screen. "Mind if I take a quick shot? For memory's sake." Kofi didn't answer, but he didn't stop him either. The man lifted the watch, angled it under the lamp, and the camera clicked. Once, twice. Then he smiled like nothing had happened. "Pretty little piece. You know, there used to be rumors about a man—" "I know the rumors," Kofi said. That silenced him. Amahle's chest was tight. She wanted to scream, to snatch the watch, to smash the phone. But something deeper held her. Curiosity, yes, but also fear. Fear of what would happen when the world outside learned what she had just found out, and fear of what she still didn't know. The man, Femi Ajayi, curled up by the wall, and soon slept with his mouth open, snoring gently through the rain. But Amahle stayed awake. Her thoughts raced past each crash of thunder. In the quiet after the storm, Kofi stood by the edge of the hut again, water running from the folds of his clothes. He did not go back to the inner room. He stayed with the fire, letting it warm his fingers but not his face. His silhouette trembled, not from the cold, but from something deeper, something undone. Amahle reached toward the edge of the shelf where the ring had been. It was gone. He must have taken it. She looked at the closed door once more. The broken lock lay on the ground, useless now. The secrets it once guarded had leaked into the night, like river water through a cracked hull. In the corner, a single drop from the roof hit the photo frame. It landed right on the woman's face, soft-eyed, forever still, leaving a wet trail across her cheek, like a tear sliding backward into memory. Amahle turned away and pressed her fingers to her lips. The hut smelled of wet wood, and something else now, something metallic and heavy, like the aftertaste of old grief. Rainwater trickled under the woven mat. The wind had quieted, but the silence left in its wake was louder than before. She lay down, but sleep did not come, because now she knew the truth, and the truth had a name. one that didn't belong in this place, and the world, whether they liked it or not, was going to come looking. The mud sucked at her heels like a warning. Every step forward left a ghost of her behind. The reeds scraped her arms, the thorns sliced small red lines across her ankles, but she didn't slow down. Dawn hadn't broken yet, but the sky was bruising into light, purple pulling away from black. Amahle ran with the kind of breath that hurt, not the breath of fear, the breath of decision, sharp, final, full of questions she didn't want answered. Behind her, the hut disappeared in the trees. The river noise grew faint, but her pulse was louder. Her hands gripped the handles of a basket she hadn't packed. It had been by the doorway. She grabbed it out of habit, maybe. Or maybe Kofi had left it there on purpose. She didn't know. She only knew she had to get away. From the name Chike Adesina. From the gold ring and the family photo, and the man who slept outside but kept a sealed room of silence. From herself, because whatever she thought she understood had collapsed in one stormy night. She reached the edge of Mbali's eastern field, just as the sun cracked low through a torn cloud. The grass was soaked. Dew clung to the folds of her skirt. The path curved around a stone marker half swallowed by vines. She stopped to breathe, chest burning, and only then heard the soft sound inside the basket. Paper shifting. She crouched, loosened the lid. Inside, on top of dried cassava and 2 pieces of smoked fish, lay the cloth-bound notebook, the same one she'd touched by the fire. But now, tucked between its pages, folded carefully, was a single sheet. A piece of pale paper, clean and firm. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it. In the center, written in slow, careful script, for the one who still belongs to something, learn this. It's the last right I still know how to give. The note wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. The strokes of the letters were unmistakable. He had written it by lamplight, maybe while she slept, maybe while she was already planning to run. Her chest tightened, as if all the air she'd stolen by fleeing was trying to crawl back out of her. She sat down hard on the wet ground. Her thumb traced the word belong. It didn't sting the way she thought it would. Somewhere, a heron lifted from the reeds. Its wings cut through the sky like a blade. The wind changed, and Amahle stood. She turned. The walk back took longer, not because of the distance, but because every step forward meant letting go of an old piece of her. And every glance at the notebook in her hand made her feel like maybe, just maybe, something could be rewritten. Kofi didn't look surprised when she reappeared at the edge of the clearing. He stood by the hut, shirt half dried, one sleeve rolled, brushing ash from the hearth. He saw her, saw the basket, saw the notebook in her grip. She expected scolding or silence. He only nodded once, slow. Then he said, "Come." She followed without a word. They crossed the path leading into the older part of the village. The trees grew taller there, the wind quieter. Juma Tamba's compound stood shaded beneath a massive baobab, its branches like ribs protecting something vital. The headman sat on a carved stool outside, sharpening a curved knife with even strokes. When he saw them, he didn't rise, only lifted his eyes and waited. Kofi spoke first. "I need your seal, one more time." Juma Tamba's hands stilled. He studied them both for a moment. His eyes lingered on Amahle, then dropped to the notebook, then returned to Kofi. The silence that followed was dense. Then the headman rose without asking why. Inside the house, everything smelled of tobacco and ground cola. A single oil lamp burned, even in daylight. A wooden table, scarred and old. Kofi removed a folded document from his sleeve. 2 sheets, freshly inked. He placed them gently on the table. Protection papers, he said. Adoption. By village right. Amahle's breath caught. She looked at him startled. His eyes remained on the paper. No more debt, no trade, no purchase, only choice. Juma Tamba picked up the pen, but paused halfway. He looked at the signature. Neat, deliberate, unmistakable. Then back at Kofi. He said nothing, but the look in his eyes shifted. Recognition passed through him like a bird shadow across stone. He tapped the paper once, gently, and reached for the village seal. The stamp burned hot from the coal pan. He pressed it down. 1, 2, 3 times. Red wax spread and hardened into the shape of finality. When it was done, he turned to Amahle. You need to sign. Her body went still. I don't know how. Kofi opened the notebook, flipped to a blank page, tore it clean, set it in front of her, then handed her the pen. Her fingers shook, not from fear, but from something older. Shame. She stared at the blank space and felt the weight of every name she'd ever been called that wasn't hers. Girl, burden, cost. Kofi knelt beside her. He said nothing, but with the edge of his thumb, he traced 3 letters into the wooden table. Slow, patient. She breathed in and wrote, M. H-L. The name came out uneven, the M too wide, the L crooked, but it was hers, fully, not given, not branded, not whispered behind palms, written. Juma Tamba lifted the page, nodded, and pressed the final seal. Done, he said, but Amahle barely heard. Her fingers still hovered above the ink. Her chest swelled with something terrifying and radiant. Not pride, not yet, but the beginning of a shape inside her that could one day become it. They stepped outside into the gold of late morning. The sun had burned away the mist. A goat bleated nearby. Children called from the riverbank. The world kept moving, but Amahle didn't. She held the notebook tight against her chest. The ink was still drying. Her name gleamed on the edge of the page. Her real name. For the first time, she believed it had a body, a spine, a sound that couldn't be silenced. Beside her, Kofi didn't speak. He only watched the wind lift the corners of the stamped paper, still clutched in Juma Tamba's hand. Then his eyes turned back to Amahle, and for the first time she didn't look away. She didn't need to, because she was no longer something borrowed, traded, or pitied. She was Amahle. The mud sucked at her heels like a warning. Every step forward left a ghost of her behind. The reeds scraped her arms. The thorn sliced small red lines across her ankles. But she didn't slow down. Dawn hadn't broken yet, but the sky was bruising into light, purple pulling away from black. Amahle ran with the kind of breath that hurt, not the breath of fear, the breath of decision. Sharp, final, full of questions she didn't want answered. Behind her, the hut disappeared in the trees. The river noise grew faint, but her pulse was louder. Her hands gripped the handles of a basket she hadn't packed. It had been by the doorway. She grabbed it out of habit, maybe. Or maybe Kofi had left it there on purpose. She didn't know. She only knew she had to get away. From the name Chike Adesina, from the gold ring and the family photo and the man who slept outside but kept a sealed room of silence. From herself, because whatever she thought she understood had collapsed in one stormy night. She reached the edge of Mbele's eastern field, just as the sun cracked low through a torn cloud. The grass was soaked. Dew clung to the folds of her skirt. The path curved around a stone marker half swallowed by vines. She stopped to breathe, chest burning, and only then heard the soft sound inside the basket. Paper shifting. She crouched, loosened the lid. Inside, on top of dried cassava and 2 pieces of smoked fish, lay the cloth-bound notebook, the same one she'd touched by the fire. But now, tucked between its pages, folded carefully, was a single sheet, a piece of pale paper, clean and firm. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it. In the center, written in slow, careful script, "For the one who still belongs to something. Learn this. It's the last right I still know how to give." The note wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. The strokes of the letters were unmistakable. He had written it by lamplight, maybe while she slept, maybe while she was already planning to run. Her chest tightened, as if all the air she'd stolen by fleeing was trying to crawl back out of her. She sat down hard on the wet ground. Her thumb traced the word belong. It didn't sting the way she thought it would. Somewhere, a heron lifted from the reeds. Its wings cut through the sky like a blade. The wind changed, and Amahle stood. She turned. The walk back took longer, not because of the distance, but because every step forward meant letting go of an old piece of her. And every glance at the notebook in her hand made her feel like maybe, just maybe, something could be rewritten. Kofi didn't look surprised when she reappeared at the edge of the clearing. He stood by the hut, shirt half dried, one sleeve rolled, brushing ash from the hearth. He saw her, saw the basket, saw the notebook in her grip. She expected scolding or silence. He only nodded once, slow. Then he said, "Come." She followed without a word. They crossed the path leading into the older part of the village. The trees grew taller there, the wind quieter. Jumatamba's compound stood shaded beneath a massive baobab, its branches like ribs protecting something vital. The headman sat on a carved stool outside, sharpening a curved knife with even strokes. When he saw them, he didn't rise, only lifted his eyes and waited. Kofi spoke first. "I need your seal one more time." Jumatamba's hands stilled. He studied them both for a moment. His eyes lingered on Amahle, then dropped to the notebook, then returned to Kofi. The silence that followed was dense. Then the headman rose without asking why. Inside the house, everything smelled of tobacco and ground cola. A single oil lamp burned, even in daylight. A wooden table, scarred and old. Kofi removed a folded document from his sleeve. 2 sheets, freshly inked. He placed them gently on the table. "Protection papers," he said. "Adoption by village right." Amahle's breath caught. She looked at him, startled. His eyes remained on the paper. No more debt, no trade, no purchase, only choice. Jumatamba picked up the pen, but paused halfway. He looked at the signature, neat, deliberate, unmistakable. Then back at Kofi. He said nothing, but the look in his eyes shifted. Recognition passed through him like a bird shadow across stone. He tapped the paper once, gently, and reached for the village seal. The stamp burned hot from the coal pan. He pressed it down, 1, 2, 3 times. Red wax spread and hardened into the shape of finality. When it was done, he turned to Amahle. "You need to sign." Her body went still. I don't know how." Kofi opened the notebook, flipped to a blank page, tore it clean, set it in front of her, then handed her the pen. Her fingers shook, not from fear, but from something older. Shame. She stared at the blank space and felt the weight of every name she'd ever been called that wasn't hers. Girl, burden, cost. Kofi knelt beside her. He said nothing, but with the edge of his thumb, he traced 3 letters into the wooden table. Slow, patient. She breathed in, and wrote, M. H-L-E. The name came out uneven, the M too wide, the L crooked. But it was hers, fully, not given, not branded, not whispered behind palms, written. Juma Tamba lifted the page, nodded, and pressed the final seal. "Done," he said. But Amahle barely heard. Her fingers still hovered above the ink. Her chest swelled with something terrifying and radiant. Not pride, not yet, but the beginning of a shape inside her that could one day become it. They stepped outside into the gold of late morning. The sun had burned away the mist. A goat bleated nearby. Children called from the riverbank. The world kept moving. But Amahle didn't. She held the notebook tight against her chest. The ink was still drying. Her name gleamed on the edge of the page. Her real name. For the first time, she believed it had a body, a spine, a sound that couldn't be silenced. Beside her, Kofi didn't speak. He only watched the wind lift the corners of the stamped paper still clutched in Juma Tamba's hand. Then his eyes turned back to Amahle, and for the first time she didn't look away. She didn't need to, because she was no longer something borrowed, traded, or pitied. She was Amahle. The knock came like a hammer. Once, twice, then the full weight of a fist rattling the reed wall with authority. Amahle froze, her hand still holding the chalk that moments ago had been tracing the word sky across the wooden board. A row of children sat before her on rough stools, eyes wide, mouths half open. The morning sun filtered through the cracks in the hut, warm and golden. The smell of damp earth and drying cassava clung to their clothes. They had just learned the letter S. Kofi stepped into the doorway, face unreadable. Outside, the air shifted. Not just the wind. Something heavier. Bakari Okello had returned. Amahle rose slowly. Her fingers smudged the chalk line across the page. Her chest tightened. Kofi met her eyes. "Stay here," he said softly. Then he turned and walked outside. She didn't stay. She followed. Outside, the village was already gathering. Feet on dust, voices under breath. Heads turned in the way people do when they pretend to be surprised by what they always expected. Bakari stood tall in the center, his staff planted deep in the dirt. The sun struck the side of his face, sharpening the lines around his mouth. He looked thinner than before, but his voice still carried the same iron. "You know why I'm here?" Kofi didn't answer. He stepped down from the threshold, slow and deliberate. "She was promised," Bakari continued. "The time is due. I've come to collect what's mine." A murmur rose from the crowd. Someone spit into the dirt. Another muttered something about curses. Amahle stood behind Kofi, shoulders square, notebook clutched to her chest. Her legs trembled, but she did not step back. Bakari's eyes flicked to her. They narrowed. Kofi reached into the fold of his tunic. He unfolded the parchment with care, letting the red seal catch the light. "You signed this," he said, his voice calm, "in the presence of Juma Tamba, with your own hand, paid in full." He held up the second paper. "And this," his fingers brushed the new seal, "signed by the council. She is under my protection, recognized by the rights of the village. She belongs to no one but herself now." Bakari scoffed. "Paper means nothing when mouths go hungry." "And it means everything when mouths lie." Juma Tamba's voice cut through the murmurs like a blade. The crowd parted as the old headman walked forward, his cane tapping once, twice. He stood beside Kofi, eyes sweeping the crowd. This was witnessed, sealed, not once, but twice. "The debt is closed." Bakari's jaw clenched. "She was not yours to sell, and now she is not his to take," Juma said. "Let that be clear." Amahle stepped forward before fear could speak for her. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. "And I teach," she said. "The children, here, with this." She held up the cloth-bound notebook. The fabric rippled in the breeze. "I teach them to write their names." The silence that followed was thicker than the heat. A mother in the back nodded. A boy in the front pointed to the chalk dust on his sleeve, smiling shyly. An elder crossed her arms and nodded just once. "She has value," someone said. "More than fish or coin," said another. Bakari turned. His gaze swept the hut, the children, the papers, the crowd, and then it landed. Inside the hut, tucked just behind the open door, a sliver of metal caught the sun. The ring. The one with the crest, etched like memory. It had slipped from Kofi's sleeve, rolled against the frame. Bakari's eyes narrowed. He shifted, pulled something from his pocket. A quiet click. He took a photo. Nobody noticed. Then he turned back to the crowd. "Fine," he said, his mouth curled bitterly. "Keep your noble lies and stamped scraps. But debts have a way of circling back." He didn't wait for a reply. He walked off slow, the dust curling behind him. People watched. No one followed. Kofi bent down and picked up the ring, slipped it into his palm. His fingers closed tight. He didn't speak. Neither did Amahle, until Juma Tamba placed a hand on her shoulder. "Some victories are loud," he said, "but the ones that last are quiet." Later, when the sun had softened and the children were gone, Amahle stood in the same spot and looked out across the clearing. Kofi sat on the threshold, sharpening a broken pencil with a knife. The wind played gently with the corners of the notebook she'd left open beside him. She stepped behind him. "You didn't need to do all that." He didn't look up. "I did." She watched the shavings curl, fall into his lap. "I don't feel bought anymore," she said. "No," he replied, "because you never were." She looked out at the path Bakari had taken, empty now. The trees swayed like they were releasing something. She stepped closer, leaned just enough that her shoulder brushed his. It was the first time she did it on purpose. He didn't pull away. She looked down and saw her name again in the notebook, written bold across the top of the page. Beneath it, the letters she'd been teaching. S-K-Y. Amahle. Sky. She exhaled slow. Her fingers relaxed. Her heartbeat slowed. For the first time, she realized something. It wasn't just that she had been protected. It was that she had been protected out loud, in front of everyone, like it mattered. And somehow, that changed everything. The horn echoed across the river like a war drum made of glass. Shrill, clean, out of place. Amahle dropped the basin she was rinsing. Water splashed her skirt, but she didn't flinch. Others turned too, drawn by the same alien sound. The children near the schoolhouse stopped singing. Birds scattered from the tamarind trees. Then came the sight, a white yacht, smooth and glinting like something cut from ivory, nosed through the reeds at the bend. Its wake rolled against the canoes tied at the banks, sending ripples that slapped the wood in protest. A gold-trimmed flag rose from the stern, stitched with an unfamiliar crest. Villagers gathered in clumps, whispering. A few gasped aloud. No one in Mbeli had ever seen a vessel that clean, that tall, that loud. Its engine purred like a lion beneath silk. The ramp extended. Shoes tapped against polished wood. First came the lawyer, tall, severe, skin-deep bronze like sun-burnished bark. She wore gray trousers that didn't belong to the earth here, and a scarf sharp as a blade around her neck. She stepped onto the soil without looking down. Then the journalist, thinner, camera slung to chest, eyes already scanning, already seeing. He nodded once to himself, as if confirming what he'd hoped for. They didn't ask permission. They walked straight through the murmuring crowd like a storm cutting across still water. Kofi stood waiting by the fire pit. He hadn't moved since the yacht came into view. His hands were clean, his shirt plain, his eyes unreadable. Amahle Cole stopped 2 feet from him. "Mr. Adesina," she said. The name did not echo. It settled over the crowd like ash. "You've been found." No one laughed. No one needed to. She opened a folder, pulled out 2 photographs. The first, a close-up of the ring. Sharp, undeniable, the crest visible. The second, the gold watch with the engraved initials. CA. The ring was traced to a private commission in Lagos. The watch was registered under Adesina Holdings pre-sinking. 10 years ago. She raised her eyes to his. "You are Chike Adesina, presumed dead, now confirmed living." Kofi said nothing. No denial, no acceptance. The wind pulled at the hem of his shirt. Noah Campbell clicked his camera once, then again. Amahle continued. "There is a trust fund under your name, untouched. Your return activates its full privileges. I represent the holding group." More clicking. A child cried. Someone whispered, "He's rich." Another, "He lied." Someone else spat. Juma Tamba stepped forward, his face still as a carved drum. "He has lived among us. He has fed our children. He has harmed no one." Amahle nodded. "I'm not here for dispute. I'm here for recognition and for response." She stepped aside. The journalist turned his lens toward Kofi. "Do you deny your name?" Kofi blinked, slowly, then lifted his eyes to the crowd. He did not speak to the lawyer. He did not speak to the camera. He spoke to them. "I was lost," he said, "and chose not to be found." Noah lifted the camera again. Kofi stepped forward once, his voice steadier now. "But if the world insists on naming me, let it also hear this." He turned to Amahle. "I want the trust dissolved." She raised a brow. "Excuse me, not into my pocket, into the Mbeli River Fund, education, clean water, clinics, no titles, no boardrooms, only use." A stir moved through the villagers, a wave of disbelief, then awe, then confusion. Abini's voice sharpened. "That fund is legally—" He raised a hand. "I built a world that forgot people like this." He looked at Amahle. "Now I'll build a world that remembers them." A woman behind him gasped. Another crossed herself. Someone muttered, "He's mad." But others nodded, others wept. The lawyer's lips parted, but she said nothing. The journalist stepped back, camera lowered now, watching. Amahle didn't move. She couldn't. She stood by the school door, her hands pressed against the worn frame, the smell of chalk and old wood rising around her. The same frame she'd cleaned every morning, the same place she'd taught letters. Kofi turned to her fully now, and in front of them all, elders, traders, children, skeptics, he said, "You are my family now." The hush that followed was full, not of doubt, but of understanding. Amahle did not cry, but her fingers tightened on the wood. The air was thicker, the river louder. Even the birds held their breath, and from the white yacht, the name Chike Adesina faded into the reeds, like a leaf cut loose, floating down a current that no longer held him. They came with polished shoes that never knew mud. Their car didn't fit on the village path, so it sat awkwardly by the rice field, its windows shining like judgment. The woman from the city stepped out first, thin lips, square glasses, voice smooth like someone who'd never been interrupted. She carried a folder pressed tight to her chest, the kind with promises folded inside. Behind her came a man with too many pens in his jacket. His clipboard clicked with each step. They didn't greet anyone. They didn't ask for directions. They already knew the name. "Amahle," the woman called as if she belonged to her. The classroom door creaked open. Chalk dust curled in the air. Amahle stood in her old skirt, barefoot, palms still white from writing lessons. Her eyes didn't blink fast. Her voice didn't rush. "Yes? We've come to offer you your future," the woman said, and she smiled like it was charity. Inside the envelope was the scholarship. Full tuition, housing, stipend, a seat at one of the best city academies, paid for by donors who liked stories of girls rising from dust. They handed her the letter like a crown, as if it would erase the red ink she once saw on the debt note that sold her, as if she hadn't already become whole without them. The children in her class watched from the doorway. One held a piece of chalk Amahle had given him that morning. Another clutched the cloth-bound notebook she had used to teach them vowels. She read the letter once, then folded it, and said, "I'll give you my answer tomorrow." That night, the wind wouldn't stay still. It scratched at the roof. It whispered through the reed walls like old stories returning. Amahle sat alone, holding the coat Kofi had placed over her shoulders the first night. The same coat she hadn't touched since. It still smelled of smoke, of river, of him. She turned it over in her lap, threadbare at the collar, stitched 3 times near the hem, one missing button, but heavy. Not just with time, with meaning. She didn't sleep. Morning came. She put it on and walked into the center of the village. The meeting had already gathered. Everyone knew something was coming. Word traveled faster than fire in Amahle. Some thought she would leave. Some thought she would ask for permission to go. Some came to mourn her departure. Okello was there too, leaning against a post, arms crossed, mouth smug like a man waiting for someone to fail. Amahle stepped up with her head high. The coat hung too big on her frame, but it made her look taller. "I received a scholarship," she said. Her voice carried. "It is real. It is generous." Murmurs began. "She's leaving. She deserves it. She won't survive out there." She raised her hand. "But I won't go." The air cracked. Some gasped. One child shouted, "Why?" She turned slowly. "Because what they offered me was only for me." She opened the notebook, holding it above her head. "This notebook doesn't belong to one person. It belongs to the voices that were never taught to write, to the hands that never held a pen, to the names that were never spelled out loud." She looked directly at the city visitors. "I want to convert my scholarship into a community grant, to build the Bensonga River Library, to fill it with books, with light, with names we choose for ourselves." A beat of silence. Then Okello stepped forward, slow claps echoing like mockery. "Or maybe," he sneered, "you're just afraid. Maybe the city would see you for what you really are. A girl with nothing but a borrowed coat and a village fantasy." Laughter from 2 behind him. Someone muttered, "Ungrateful." Amahle didn't flinch. She stepped forward until the coat's hem brushed the dust near his boots. She looked him in the eye. "I've worn debts before," she said quietly. "They don't fit like this." He opened his mouth to reply, but Jumatamba raised his cane and stepped forward. "Enough." The elder's voice stopped birds mid-flight. He turned to the visitors. "The Amahle River Trust, funded in full by the man you called Chike Adesina, has already pledged support for this community project." Gasps broke. Amahle's mouth parted. She hadn't known. Juma's eyes were steady. "She asked for no money, but we give it. Because she's already given more than gold. She gave back belief." The visitors shifted. One tried to argue policy. The other muttered about protocols. But no one listened. The villagers had already begun nodding. One mother lifted her child. Another pulled a notebook from her shawl and raised it in the air. The children gathered, forming a circle around Amahle. Their hands were ink-stained. Their cheeks dusted with chalk. Their voices, for once, were louder than the adults. "She taught me to write my name. She showed me how to read. She says sky means hope. Kofi stepped into the clearing then. Quiet, steady. He said nothing. But Amahle turned, saw him, and reached for his hand. Their fingers met, not like lovers, not like heroes, but like two people who had stood at the edge of something unnamed and chose to stay. She raised their hands together. "I choose Mbele," she said, and for the first time the entire village stood behind her. Not for tradition, not for obligation, but for something new being born in the shape of her voice. The children shouted her name. The elders nodded. Even the wind stopped whispering, and Kofi, his grip warm, his face still, looked at her as if seeing a dawn that had taken years to rise. The sky burned orange. The library didn't exist yet, but its doors were already open. The gate creaked open on its new hinges, slow, reverent, like a throat preparing to speak a first word. It wasn't an ordinary gate. It was the old wooden door, once locked to hide a life, now sanded smooth, stained with sunlight, and hung between two red clay pillars. A simple sign arched above it, Mbele River Library. Amahle stood beneath it, arms folded beneath the same coat from the night she arrived, its fraying edge patched now with fabric stitched by the school children themselves. The sky was streaked with honey light. Smoke from celebratory cooking fires drifted behind the library roof, mixing the smell of roasted yams and fresh-cut timber. The crowd grew early, grandmothers in patterned shawls, young boys barefoot and wild-eyed. A few men who once sneered now brought bundles wrapped in cloth. Books, half-broken stools, a mirror, chalk wrapped in banana leaves. No one was turned away. Kofi moved quietly along the edge, setting benches, adjusting the string of flags drawn by the children. Letters painted in shaky, glorious strokes. A is for Amahle, B is for book, C is for choice. Inside the classroom, the cloth-bound notebook rested on a wooden podium. It was open to the first page where her name had been written slowly once, trembling. Now it was surrounded by dozens of other names, children who had copied it, claimed it, and added their own. Juma Tamba arrived last, leaning heavier than usual on his cane. He nodded once to Amahle, once to Kofi, and took his place on the front bench without ceremony. She stepped forward, no microphone, no grand ribbon, just her voice, lifted above wind and rustle. This place was not built by wealth. A pause. The village stilled. It was built by memory, by voices that were never written down, and by hands that never stopped working, even when the world forgot them. She turned to the door behind her. This used to be the thing that kept truth hidden. Now it welcomes it. A cheer rose, not loud, but real, not rehearsed. She opened the notebook, held it high. This will be our first textbook. It has no printed words, only proof that we already know how to begin. The children clapped first, then the mothers, then everyone. Even Juma smiled, small and deep. Amahle stepped down, breath shaking. She didn't notice the man standing at the back until the crowd parted for him. Just a little, not in fear, in curiosity. Femi Ajayi. He wore the same coat, now cleaned, the dust beaten out of it. His shoulders had dropped some weight. His eyes flicked once toward Kofi. Then he reached into his pocket, slow, no drama. He pulled out a cloth bundle, small and tight, unwrapped it. The ring, the same crest, still shining. He didn't speak. He held it out to Kofi with both hands. Kofi looked at it, long and hard. He didn't touch it right away. Then he took it. Femi bowed, not deeply, but enough. A gesture that didn't beg, but acknowledged. He turned and left before anyone could stop him. Amahle watched it all. That night, as the sky thickened to cobalt, and the library door creaked shut for the first time, Kofi knelt beneath the baobab tree, the same one where the village once held judgment circles, the same one that saw debt change hands. He dug with his bare hands. The earth was soft, damp with blessing. He placed the ring into a shallow hollow, covered it with soil, then pressed a small wooden plaque into the ground. It read, "Wealth of the past, knowledge for the future." He didn't speak, but when he stood, his shoulders were lighter. Inside, Amahle arranged the last of the alphabet flags. The children returned, even after sunset, to touch the door, to point at the first page of the notebook, to hear their names said aloud again, and again, and again. She stood in front of them, the light of the oil lamp flickering against her skin, the shadows of the flags dancing behind her like wind-borne prayers. One child asked, "What do we learn first?" She smiled, then pointed at the letter A. "Not what," she said. "Who?" The children looked at her, puzzled. She closed the book and said her name, clearly, fully. Amahle. The syllables rang like bells through the open windows. Kofi stood at the doorway, arms crossed, watching her, as if he were reading something sacred. The school bell hadn't been rung that day. No one remembered to. They were too busy listening. To names, to futures, to something opening wide as the river, wide as breath, wide as the page. Sometimes, the quietest stories are the ones that change us most, not the ones shouted from mountaintops, but the ones born in silence, in the rustle of pages turned by hands that never expected to hold a book, in the soft echo of a name finally spoken aloud without shame, in a door once locked now swinging open to let light in. These are the stories that don't demand our attention, but earn it, gently, persistently, like water shaping stone. Because every life holds a secret room, some part of us boarded up by fear, by history, by survival. But even a broken lock can't keep truth from finding its way through. Sometimes it takes a storm, sometimes a stranger, sometimes all it takes is someone who chooses to stay. And what we pass down, what truly matters, is not wealth or legacy or even blood. It's how we see one another. It's the way we choose to bear witness when someone finds their voice. It's the courage to say, "You belong, you matter, your story deserves to be heard." Growth doesn't always mean going far. Sometimes it means going deeper, rooting ourselves where it hurts, standing firm where we were once bent, giving back not because we owe, but because we finally understand the value of what was given to us when we had nothing. And in the end, perhaps that's the truest kind of wealth, the kind that builds others. So wherever you are right now, whatever storms you've weathered, whatever doors you're still afraid to open, may you find the strength to name what you love, protect what you believe, and build something that lasts beyond your own footsteps. Because someone is always watching, and someone will remember that you stayed. Thank you for listening to this story. If it moved you in any way, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to follow or subscribe to stay with us as more voices rise, quietly, powerfully, just like this one.